Premier, thanks for joining me. I want to know when you think back on 2022, what will stand out to you about the work your government's done?
Well, I think there's a number of things that occurred, throughout 2022, and first, we came into some very choppy waters, like other provinces and like other regions around the world. And the fact that we were still in the midst of, very much in the midst of a global pandemic as we entered 2022, as we find our way through the year. Saskatchewan most certainly is in a much stronger position when you look at the investments that have landed in Saskatchewan. Because the financial situation of the province in general, we were able to start to pay down some of that pandemic debt that we had acquired over the last couple of years. But what would really stand out to me, I think, is Saskatchewan people in general. The government was a small part of this, but Saskatchewan people in general, the generosity that they have shown in receiving, hosting, volunteering, and supporting folks from all over the world, but in particular those folks from the war-torn area of Ukraine due to the Russian invasion that has occurred there. We've been a part of that as government, arranging for some flights with an international charity, but it most certainly is people in community after community that have literally opened their own home to support people. And we have a very strong Ukrainian heritage in this province. I think about 17% of residents would trace their roots back to the Ukraine, came here over the course of the last 100 years, and I think in a large part have been part of building this province over the last century. And so I think what I would be most proud of this past year is what Saskatchewan people have done in supporting our friends and family from another country in a time of distress.
You talked about that surplus. What went into the decision to give the $500 checks and the timing of that, and what more could be on the way? Because there is issues with food bank usage and affordability right now.
Yeah, well, there was priorities in the discussion as we found our way through what was going to turn from a deficit to ultimately a surplus. And so first we wanted to achieve zero. So the first $460 million went into balancing the budget. Debt repayment was a priority, and that will benefit in years coming, $50 to $70 million in interest costs. And so the first $1 billion very much was earmarked to repay some of the pandemic debt that we had acquired the last couple of years, not unlike other provinces across Canada. But we also wanted to have a balance on how we were going to invest in the people of the province. And so we increased our education investment. For example, this fall we increased some of the investments that we have in our urban centers in homelessness, for example. But we also wanted to help families across the province address affordability, and we wanted to do so quickly and in as simple a fashion as we possibly can. And that's why we landed on the over 18 criteria and just return really some of the resource revenue dollars that we had received right back to the rightful owner, which is all of the people of Saskatchewan. And so I know there's some discussion about how that maybe could have been done differently. It couldn't have been done as quickly and touched as many families across the province under any other mechanism. And so that was really, the priorities that we had was balance the budget, pay down some debt, support small business, make some investments where they're needed, like our education system, but really try to address some of the affordability, inflationary challenges that we know families are having, at this point in time.
Going forward, there's a lot of asks from the healthcare system. There's problems finding family doctors. We've talked about service disruptions in hospitals and health centers. Can any of that money be used towards helping that, or is that more of a longer-term plan?
Well, yes and yes. Some of those dollars already are being used as we have our Health Human Resource Action Plan in play. Our health minister was just recently in the Philippines, but there's a number of initiatives that we put $60 million behind to bring more people into our facilities. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're thankful for the recruitment that we've done over the last decade or decade and a half, and that has increased our number of nurses, our number of physicians. But there's more to do, and that's very evident. And it's not just exclusively an issue in Saskatchewan. There's more to do across Canada, and so that's why the premiers have asked the Prime Minister minister to and the federal government to become a full funding partner of the Canada Health Transfer would be step one. But the provinces are already making those necessary investments into our healthcare systems, whether it be our health human resource action plan on getting more hands to those front lines to support our frontline workers that are there today that do need some support, and so that's on its way and will be coming over the next number of months. But the second piece, there are other pieces to that as well. There's going to be increased need for mental health and addictions investment, and we're doing some of that in our 150 rehabilitation beds. We're doing some of that with some of the intakes that will be provided at our urgent care centers in Regina and with a partnership with the Smith Cree Nation in Saskatoon. There's our surgical wait times, which are a challenge across the nation that need to be addressed, and we're going to have to be innovative in how we do that, and we've put forward a plan for that here in Saskatchewan. And so the provinces are making all of that investment. And what we're asking the federal government now to do is to rebase the Canada Health Transfer so that investment is sustainable for years into the future and preserves really the public health care that we know and value in Canada.
Do you think there should be strings attached to that money? Do you think it should come to the provinces as has to be used on healthcare, or you're submitting your receipts? How do you see that if that money does increase from the federal government?
So I think we align on the priorities. We most certainly, and I won't speak for the federal government, but I'm certain we align on the priorities on what we want to see as outcomes. We want to see more surgeries performed so that there's a shorter surgical wait time list. We want to see additional investment in mental health and all too often subsequent addictions so that families have access to a bed for their loved one, whether it be detox, whether it be rehabilitation, when that decision is made. And we want to see the proper supports for our frontline healthcare workers in each and all of our facilities, and that's going to take more people working in those facilities. And so I think as far as the priorities go, we align very well with the federal government, and I doubt whether there's any really misalignment even among provinces. Where the challenges in having strings attached become is there are some regional differences in what the needs are. We saw some of the long-term care challenges that occurred in a couple of areas of the country. Not saying that everywhere doesn't need to improve, the services that we're offering, but there might be some distinct and different challenges in other areas of the country. And so I think as long as any of the parameters involve the priorities, I think we'll be fine. When they get into the details of prescribing, what is and what isn't, you're going to see differences, obviously, in a country as vast and broad as Canada, from coast to coast to coast, that it'll be problematic and ultimately may make it more unworkable in the long term. And so the goal here is to rebase the CHT and to allow provinces to continue to deliver provincially delivered healthcare that is much aligned across the nation and to a level that Canadians expect.
Speaking of the federal government and the relationship, the kind of maybe the totem bill for your province was the Saskatchewan First Act. Why was that important to bring in the Saskatchewan First Act, make it the first bill of the sitting, and what do you think it's going to do for the province? Well,
the Saskatchewan First Act is ultimately a shield. It's a shield. We see the federal government, and we identified 9 of the policies that the federal government is waving around, that aren't realistic, and quite frankly, we had identified in our white paper what that cost would be. So they have this sword of environmental policy that they're waving around, and what the Saskatchewan First Act is a shield, really defending the Canadian Constitution and the provincial jurisdiction that we have in Saskatchewan and that we feel every other province would have as well. And chief among that provincial jurisdiction is our ability to develop our natural resources, which ultimately are the source of our wealth in community after community across Saskatchewan. And we're very proud of what we produce, whether it be our uranium, our potash, our agri-food products, the energy that we produce, because not only is it high quality, but it's the most sustainable product that you can find on earth. And that's why we launched our Sustainable Saskatchewan branding, was to communicate just how we're producing these products in Saskatchewan, not only to our customers in 150 countries around the world, but to also communicate how we're producing our products to other North Americans, as well as our fellow Canadians. And so we're very proud of not only what we produce in Saskatchewan as people that live here, but we're very proud of how we produce it. And we would invite other Canadians to be equally proud of these products, because when they do, or when they are shipped to the 150 plus countries that we export to each and every year, they have a Canadian flag on. And so we're very proud of that, and we're going to embark on an initiative to communicate not only with our customers but other Canadians. And what the Saskatchewan First Act is really ensuring us the ability to be successful as we've been the last decade or two, for the next number of decades, for that next generation to have the opportunities that we currently have.
Do you feel like there needs to be a conversation or more discussion with the FSIN or some of the First Nations leaders who've come out and had some opposition to the Saskatchewan First Act?
Yeah.
How can you communicate that to them, because they've made sort of a public display that this is something that they're not agreeing with at this time?
Certainly, and I've talked with a number of various leaders within the Indigenous community, including the FSIN, about what the Saskatchewan First Act and the fact that it doesn't embark on any new territory. What it really does is confirms and reasserts what we have as all provincial residents to develop the resources that we have in Saskatchewan, and those resources are developed for everyone's benefit. We have a strong track record, more work to do, but a strong track record when it comes to economic reconciliation and including all people, including Indigenous folks in our economy. Now, there's more work to do on this, but we also need to identify what we have accomplished and what we continue to accomplish each and every day. The forestry industry, we have about 30% of not only the folks working in the forestry industry, but the businesses that are operating in the forestry industry are Indigenous owned. The uranium mining industry, about 50% of the employees are Indigenous or Northern residents. And these are starts into a broader discussion about how we ensure that as our economy grows, as investment arrives in our province, that it truly is growth that is benefiting everyone. And most certainly that is some of the precipitous behind, for example, our Indigenous Finance Corporation, which is exclusively there to allow Indigenous organizations, communities to partake at the ownership level in some of that growth that is occurring in Saskatchewan. And so there's more discussions that will come, not only with the FSIN, but with other Indigenous leaders, and I would say with other leaders across the province, on the Saskatchewan First Act and how our goal ultimately is to grow a larger pie for all Saskatchewan residents so that we all benefit to a greater degree.
You introduced an idea to start the Marshal Service in a few years. The union representing the RCMP has said that's not necessary. Some other, including Chief or Blackmore, said that just give more money to the RCMP. So
right.
Introduction of the Marshal Service,
Yeah.
Why is that needed, and is it something that's going to have to be coordinated with these police forces in order to work?
Yes, it is needed, and yes, we should give more money not only to the RCMP and to municipal forces so that we can make safer communities in this province. And that's what we've been doing for the last decade, is investing heavily, I would say, in not only in the RCMP but our municipal forces as well. Because over 400 additional RCMP officers have been added in the last decade, close to 150 municipal officers in our 7 communities that operate, very targeted officers, the crime reduction team, our PAC teams, our warrant enforcement suppression teams that are working closely and are actually municipal and RCMP officers. And that needs to continue. And in our speech from the throne, we indicated we're going to add additional West officers, additional crime reduction team in the community of North Battleford and the West in Prince Albert. In addition to that, we've also repurposed or expanded the focus of our provincial protection unit as well, which is working closely and communicating with both municipal officers as well as our RCMP. And so, as we move forward with the two new forces, one being the community Indigenous police forces for communities that are requesting, and we've already signed Minister Tell on behalf of the Saskatchewan government, I believe Minister Mendocino on behalf of the federal government, and Chief Hardlot on behalf of PA Grand Council have signed a memorandum of understanding to move into this space. And so that's the first initiative that we announced in the speech from the throne, was to move into this community Indigenous policing, which would be reactive and responsive to the community, much like a municipal police force is. And so the Marshal Service will be a specialized service. It'll be there, one, to be very reactive to the provincial needs, but also to be there to support our RCMP and our municipal police services across the province. They could be in Regina for a day or two, then in Prince Albert, and then maybe back to Estevan, or maybe up into the La Loche communities as well. And so I would say, one, yes, it's a step into provincial policing, not there in any way to replace our RCMP or our municipal police forces. Quite the contrary, we need to continue to invest in both of those organizations and the people offering the services to provide safer communities that they do, but most certainly is there to support those other organizations alongside the provincial protective service that we have. And so the goal at the end of the day, I think for everyone here, is to provide safer communities for our families, whether it be La Loche, Prince Albert, Regina, Estevan, or Swift Current, and that's what we expect to occur with the two new endeavors that we have, the community-based Indigenous policing services that we do have a model to follow, and as well the provincial Saskatchewan Marshal Service.
You mentioned the Throne Speech Day, and I know you've talked about this, but what did you learn from the fallout, I guess, of the invitation of Colin Thatcher to the legislature?
Well, I learned it was a mistake, but a mistake made by a government member, and so most certainly, if I would have done anything differently in that case, I should have. As I said, we don't vet lists of MLAs that they invite, but if there's anything that I should have done differently, I most certainly should have been out sooner on behalf of the government to say that this was wrong and it shouldn't have occurred.
Going forward, is there anything that your government looks at? Is sort of the lesson learned? You don't have to make a message to the MLAs that we can't do something like this in the future, or do you think that there's something you have to do proactively, or the government has to do proactively to prevent someone from coming to the gallery or someone from coming as a guest?
Yeah, well, again, not the first time this individual has been invited to the legislature, but I think the MLAs that speak for the Saskatchewan Party MLAs, they most certainly have the message on being very sensitive and careful with respect to their invitations, and it's unfortunate, I think, for the reasons that. In this province, this is an area, when it comes to interpersonal violence, domestic abuse, we have some work to do. And the statistics aren't great. And ultimately, behind each and every one of those statistics is somebody that lives in your community, a family member, a friend, and we have some work to do. I would say we have some work to do as individuals. I would also say that we have some work to do as different levels of government to approach and address and start to drive those statistics down, because, as I said, behind each and every one of those numbers is a real person that we know and lives down the street from us.
With the tragedy at Smith Cree Nation, you talked about Indigenous police forces, and you just talked about high rates of domestic violence in the province. What's the government doing in response to that specific incident, if anything?
Well, a number of things I think we're already in motion, and I think we probably have to look at expanding. Policing we talked about, expanding the opportunities for community-based policing in Indigenous communities, expanding the support that our municipal, our RCMP officers are getting through the Saskatchewan Marshal Service. And the challenge we have, in drug-fueled property crime, let's call it what it is a challenge not just in Indigenous communities, not just in rural communities. It's a challenge across our province and in many cases across our nation. And so the one side is enforcement of the laws that we have. That's why we brought in the warrant enforcement suppression team. That's why we are going to be making the investments that we are. The second challenge is we need to provide the supports for people that when they make a choice, they may have entered a lifestyle of drug addiction, and when they make a choice that they want to take a path to a better life, we need to have the services available for them. We need to have an open detoxification bed. We need to have an open intensive rehabilitation bed, a bed that is going to find them through a much more serious addiction than maybe a 28-day alcohol rehabilitation program. And so we have made the commitment to work with our community-based organizations across the province to open up 150 intensive rehabilitation beds. That likely isn't going to be enough moving forward. I'm quite certain it won't. We're going to need more to provide more opportunities for those folks that, when they do make that decision, we have the services available for them. We also need better intake. When people make that decision, they need to know that if they go here, they are going to find a medical health professional that they ultimately need. And that's part of what our urgent care center is about. Part of those the service they offer will be about alleviating some of the pressures in our emergency rooms, so very likely high volume focus. And there's going to be another intake in those structures where if you are having a mental health crisis, if you have found yourself in a life with a drug addiction, if you go in there, we want to be able to take you by the hand and ensure that you get in front of the correct medical health professional, and we have those services to offer. And so we need better intakes, and the urgent care centers are likely an initial step into that better intake world.
I wanted to ask you about your future, and you've seen some of your colleagues across the country step away from politics. Recently, Premier Pallister, Kenny, and Horgan. Does that cross your mind when you see some of your the people you've worked alongside closely step away, or is that far in the future, not in your mind right now?
Well, it's far in the future for me. I hope it's far in the future for voters, as they ultimately have the last say. But certainly, I'm looking forward to running alongside what I think is a great team in the next provincial election here in this province. When I look at a number of folks, and they have turned over across the country, almost all of them. Have turned over at some point in the last 5 years since I've had the honor of being premier of this great province. I've made some great friends across the country, and we talk about some of the divisions maybe between provinces and the federal government, and some of the divisions that we've seen over the course of the last year in our communities, sometimes even in our families, and we need to start coming back together as families, as communities, as Canadians to really achieve what I know we can achieve, at least in this province, but I would say across Canada. And I've made those divisions, whatever they might be, at the Council of Federation table, we've found ways through those differences of opinion that we might have. And we've had folks there from various parties. John Horgan was not from a party of my choosing. We have Andrew Fury, we have Sandy Silver in the north, all from parties that are maybe distant from the policies that we would put forward. But we were able to work very much alongside them for the greater good of Canadians, and overcome some of the differences of opinion that we have, and we bring Jason Kenney to the table, Doug Ford, Francois Legault, all to that same table. We've always been able to put the what the best interests of Canadians is at the forefront in our discussions. And I think for all of us, as we enter the holiday season, there's a lesson there for us is that we take home as individuals, is let's put what is the very best, not just for ourselves but for our family. Let's put at the forefront what is the very best, not just for ourselves but for our community, for our province, and ultimately for our nation. And we, as I say, we do our best work when we come together as a family, as a community, as a province, and as a nation. And we most certainly, I think, the sooner we get back to that, the better. And I think we're well on our way, and I'm confident we're well on our way. I know the premiers are there and have been for quite a while.
Thanks for your time, Premier.
Hey, thanks so much, and Merry Christmas to you and your family, Adam, and all of your listeners as well. It's a great time to spend some time with those you love and care for.
Thanks so much.